If you've been keeping up with me for a while, or even if you've only seen one or two of my Fire Emblem videos, you can probably name some things I distinctly do not like about the series. Self-insert avatars, or anything that requires grinding, or fan service that isn't even trying to be equal opportunity, or the harder difficulty modes in general. Good luck finding another FE tuber who'll admit to that last one. That does, however, beg the question, what do I like about Fire Emblem? And why would I dedicate a sizable majority of my YouTube channel to a series that definitely has its ups and downs for me? As that exact question was in fact posed to me recently, and because I've just hit a major subscriber milestone that's absolutely worth celebrating with all of you out there, I figured that now's as good a time as any to dig into the how and why of my interest in Fire Emblem. And in doing so, perhaps open up a thoughtful conversation about why people are into this franchise more broadly beyond the tactical challenge, or the whole soft-core dating sim thing that's actually come to define these games in the last decade or so. But while we're at it, let's go ahead and get that whole parasocial romance angle out of the way first. I'm an avowed enjoyer of many actual dating sims, since they often provide interesting narrative experiences in conjunction with gratuitous homoeroticism, or at least the ones I play, anyway. I've also been known to get into a number of story-heavy indie games like Disco Elysium that offer world-building and character work that hits my various buttons, as well as entertaining homoeroticism. Even when I'm checking out other JRPGs, games with unconventional structures or stories to tell are more likely to get my interest, especially if they also come with homoeroticism. Honestly, can we all take a minute and contemplate the fact that these guys, with their abundance of schlocky rom-com lines and the sweet, sweet zest of a lord and his devoted retainer couldn't get me to write fanfiction? But these guys, with only their flirty banter and lightly suggestive narrative set pieces did? I swear to God, I'm totally normal about these two. So yes, obviously I like the gay stuff in games, even if I have to put in some work of my own to get it. But as it's quite easy to establish, Intelligent Systems doesn't exactly have a great track record on that front. And anyway, I've been a fan of the series since long before it acquired its current reputation as a waifu simulator that exists only to subsidize the roster of a mobile gacha. And given my longtime disdain of, okay, everybody is aware that I don't like avatars, so let's not revisit that same spiel all over again, because I know that a lot of people genuinely enjoy them, and I'm trying to stay positive. Let's just say that I prefer a certain level of detachment between myself and any given characters I'm shipping together, and leave it at that. And anyway, that's not relevant to what first got me into Fire Emblem, because I started back during the GBA era, when the fervor for avatar shipping was but a twinkle in the eye of all those players projecting themselves onto the Blazing Blade tactician so they could get together with Lyn. Because, yeah, FE7 was my earliest exposure to Fire Emblem, the semi-logical extension of my earliest forays into the world of JRPGs around that time. Golden Sun was cute, but too bland to stick in my mind for long. Chrono Trigger was amazing, but also just one game, and at that time getting a little dated. And Super Mario RPG and the Paper Mario games that followed were something that I got into more because I was at the time beginning to grow out of platformers as a genre, and it was only logical that I'd follow that franchise in a spin-off direction that I was starting to get into. And because I've always been an exclusively Nintendo player in terms of console gaming, I never went with Square Enix over onto the PlayStations, or even got into Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest at all, for that matter. So that brings me back to Blazing Blade. I can't honestly say that it was the gameplay of Fire Emblem that ever really held my attention, at least not when it comes to the straightforward tactical difficulty. Other players' tier list and unit ratings might be fun to check out every now and then, but I knew very early on that I'd be spending little if any time playing on these games' hardest settings. On top of that, I've discussed before that FE7 is an especially weird jumping off point if you're just getting into the series, concerning both its plot and the obnoxious level of hand-holding it forces on new players. Did I appreciate that back in 2003? Probably. I was young and still getting used to RPGs as a concept, but that's pretty much the only context in which the experience of a totally fresh playthrough of FE7 is in any way justifiable. So it had to have been something else that had me keeping up with the series as it progressed through a second GBA entry and later through its return to the consoles with the Tellius duology. And I don't think there's a nicer way to put this, but Fire Emblem truly is astonishingly tasteless. Oh sure, from Awakening onward it's all half-naked dragon girls and romancing your adoptive siblings, and a perfectly branded school rivalry over who can commit the most war crimes. But the sheer nerve of these games to go places where you really wouldn't expect them to was present even back in the GBA era. I remember well the snickering over Priscilla and Raven, or the unfounded rumors of the Renee twins being seriously into each other in the Japanese version. And of course, the near mythical status of all the bizarre stuff that goes down in Genealogy of the Holy War, at a time when very few people in the fandom had actually played it, and the only available English translation had its interesting quirks. And that's just the brother and sister stuff. Within the localized GBA games alone, there's child abuse, open adultery, implied nastiness with a reanimated corpse, human-on-dragon loving, the mere existence of the Bara bandits. In short, a whole lot of material that you would absolutely not expect out of games with such low content ratings. It might all be buried in text, and most of it is implied rather than stated outright, but it's still there. And even if you're not specifically into all that stuff, and given what we're talking about, you're more likely to wonder here who would be, IS has to earn some points for the audacity of it alone. Doubly so because Fire Emblem is still a Nintendo IP, the competitor in the console market who around the turn of the millennium was being viciously mocked for sticking almost entirely to the family-friendly stuff, while Sony and Microsoft were busy plumbing the depths of how gory and brown they could make their games look because that's what the teenagers wanted back then, apparently. Of course, Nintendo had the odd exception here and there. Metroid Prime was on the darker end of things, and for a completely different definition of a mature experience, there was the utter anomaly that was Conker's Bad Fur Day. But Fire Emblem, by contrast, was and still is an established franchise, one that's been pulling this particular off-color routine at least since the days of the Super Famicom, and is currently, without question, the only Nintendo IP with enough busty waifus and total lack of shame to sustain a commercially successful mobile gacha for 7 years running. What else could even come close to doing the same? The Legend of Zelda, if you squint? Pokemon, if you want to go diving into some of the deepest recesses of the internet? My feelings here are deeply contradictory. On the one hand, I have absolutely complained before about the ways that modern Fire Emblem exploits and commodifies its female characters, both because it's just outright misogynistic, often in ways that will generate a lot of angry responses from people who don't know what the term male gaze actually means if you point it out, and because I'm obviously outside of the target demographic here, and there's no way that you can look at this on the one hand, which YouTube felt the need to censor, by the way, and say that it's remotely equivalent to something like this. I know this too because, as mentioned earlier, I play explicit gay dating sims, so I know what earnest, technically safe-for-work male fan service in similar art styles can look like if you really care about players who are into that. But there is still that contradiction, that a part of me nonetheless appreciates the sleaze for its own sake, especially when it's so over-the-top that it passes into the realm of camp. I'd be more or less fine with even the most egregious examples of sexual fan service if IS would ever put even half as much effort into commodifying their male characters. Where's Dimitri's gratuitous underwear shot, I ask you? Now, you could easily make the argument that the tone of Fire Emblem's particular brand of sleaze has shifted over the decades, from the understated shock value approach of the pre-Awakening titles to the targeted fan service of the modern games. But it's still far and away the only Nintendo IP even attempting something like this. And one of the only pieces of media period to turn all that eyebrow-raising brother-sister stuff into a running gag. Hey, it seems to be working out pretty well for George R.R. Martin. However, I can't exactly go the entire length of this video only talking about Fire Emblem's quirky writing. After all, if that were everything I were looking for in a game, you could just go tell me to read a book or whatever. And while I do indeed do that, very few of my favorite books have active online fandoms, so I don't have much cause to bring them up in conversation. I almost never pick up video games for the challenge, but that doesn't mean I also don't enjoy them as games in my own way. Playing through the standard higher difficulty settings has never held much appeal for me, nor have any of the well-known self-imposed challenges like playing for low turn counts, or with 0% growths or anything like that. But I can name multiple instances of Fire Emblem providing me with some very entertaining gameplay opportunities, even if they happen to lie far outside of what the developers intended. Radiant Dawn's mechanic of forcing a set number of stat growths on bonus experience level-ups creates this fun little meta challenge of gaming the system to max out all of the character's stats during a run, including dump stats that you never care about practically speaking, solely for the pleasure of seeing all those green numbers. Although I rarely have much nice to say about Awakening, the intricate metagame of its Apotheosis DLC and the many ways that one can approach pairing up the first-generation characters for min-max child units can make for some fascinating theory crafting. All the more so because FE13's classes and skills are as laughably unbalanced as they are. I did a full video series a few years ago on approaching 3 houses from the perspective of 100% completion, mastering all classes and skills with every character over the course of many runs of New Game Plus. Extremely tedious, and it's guaranteed to take forever, but it's still satisfying to see the in-game journal completely filled out, and to know that such a thing is possible not through grinding, but rather through understanding the game's resource management systems well enough to get all that done over a set number of runs. That alone is almost enough to allow me to look past the 5 years of headache-inducing discourse this game has given us. Almost. In actuality, it's the shipping that still sells houses for me, even if that too has been tainted over the years by fan wank. Naturally, Fire Emblem as a franchise is ill-suited to the 100% completion mentality, even nowadays when the games are experimenting with achievement systems. Only a handful of them even have any sort of post-game to structure that around, and I don't see that changing much anytime soon. One thing my own experiments with the series gameplay have in common with the more popular ones that make for good YouTube content is that they come about in spite of IS's design choices. They're not something Fire Emblem has ever bothered to cater to directly, at least not in the way that I've seen comparable indie titles pull off on occasion. Not unlike shipping outside the strict delineations of whatever supports and paired endings the games deign to give us, it really comes down to finding ways to make your own fun. This may not be The Sims or Minecraft or anything like that, but it is kind of amazing how a series that's been telling the same story with the same 20 or so stock character types using the same point-and-click tactical gameplay for over 30 years manages to have room for all sorts of player-driven innovation. In a weird way, that's inspired the creation of some of my favorite pieces of my own content on this platform, and will certainly continue to do so in the future, especially since IS has been taking their sweet time with announcing anything new coming down the line. I already have a handful of interesting topics on assorted Fire Emblem games that you can expect to see explored before the year is out, driven by my fondness for a series that is just too delightfully shameless and malleable for its own good. That's my weird Fire Emblem story, but what about yours? Is there anything in particular that draws you to this series that's maybe a little outside of what might be expected? Or is it simply a matter of enjoying a solid set of tactical RPGs and/or visual novels with mild dating sim elements? I've really liked getting to know the little community that I've been building up here on YouTube, and I thought that talking about this would be a fun way for me to commemorate hitting the big 1,000. Like and subscribe if you haven't already too, because like I said, there's more Fire Emblem content on the way. Thanks for watching everyone, and for helping this channel grow. You're awesome. Au revoir!